So I walked over to this woman, and she says to me, she identifies herself as Nina Morrison, who's, my attorney at the Innocence Project. And when she said the items were tested, that was something that kind of set off those alarms. And I said to her, what do you mean the items have been tested? They're not supposed to have been tested for another month. And she said, well, the district attorney pulled some strings and got the lab to expedite the testing a little bit faster. And, the results match the actual perpetrator. You're going home tomorrow. And I said, no, I'm not. And when she said, you're going home tomorrow. And I said, no, I'm not. And the third time she said, you really are. You're going home tomorrow. And I again said, no, I'm not. So I had this like 3.5 hours of like a mental paralysis. So my mind starts racing. All these thoughts start coming into my head. One thought after another, and one thought has nothing to do with the other, and none of it has anything to do with what she just told me. So she's sitting there like literally holding my hand and articulating all these things that are going through my mind, and she's not responding. She's just listening to all this madness. And periodically she breaks in and says, are you ready to talk about tomorrow? And I'm like, no, let's get that away from me. No, we're not we're not talking about tomorrow. I'm not going home. Not entertaining that. Don't play with me like that. No. And so I go back to the rants again and this and that. And every now and then the same sequence happens. And finally, towards the end, she says, look, there's only like a half hour left in the visit. We've been here all day. And there's a ton of things to do with the media. I also have to get your sizes for your clothing sizes and everything, so you can get a suit for your appearance in court. And that's what made it real. And then I felt better for about 5 minutes. And then a different thought came in my head. The fear that popped into my head was that something was going to happen between that day and the next. And the district attorney was going to change her mind. And then they were going to do what they always did, which was fight me and win. So that was how I learned that I was going to be released the next day.
Wow. And when you finally got released, what was that like going back into the real world after 16 years? How the world had, I'm sure like technology had advanced, phones had evolved,
Sure. So I get up to.
Was the iPhone out yet?
No, it was not. No.
Okay.
So I get up to leave. I'm going to explain all of that to you. Great question. So I get up to leave. The court's finished. I get up to leave, and then kind of like the enormity of the moment hit me, kind of like a ton of bricks, And I sat back down, and my attorneys are talking to me, but I'm kind of hearing them and then not hearing them, and eventually the bailiffs just kind of like clear the whole court out. And so after about 20 minutes, I just kind of felt ready. So I got up and I put one step in front of the other, walking towards the end of the court, and no one's stopping me. With each step, it kind of like gets more real. And then there was this bailiff who's standing up, and she's trying to be professional, but I can see the water's running. And I looked up and made eye contact with her, and and she says, good luck. And I said, thank you. So I go outside. I remember the sky was blue. The sun was out. I didn't see a cloud anywhere. Many members of the Innocence Project and also Cardozo Law School, which they've been affiliated with, they're all like clapping because, you survived, you overcame the system, and I go to this press conference, and when it's finally my turn to speak after, Nina and Barry Scheck spoke, my first words were, is this really happening? Like I couldn't believe that I was still actually there. I thought I was just still in the prison, and it was all just a dream, and I'm going to wake back up and see the cell bars and the prison walls and everything. And I spoke there for 3.5, maybe like 2.5 hours, just doing an off-the-cuff presentation, like everything I'd ever wanted to say in 16 years, but could never get anyone to hear me about, came out. And just when I thought I was wrapping up, a different thought came out. So that was that day, and then from there, the other thing I'll mention about that day, and then I'll like go to the overall. is I went to my aunt's house because my mother had moved away. So I went to my aunt's house and we're sitting around this table. I remember sitting around the table, and this other family member that hadn't been able to get to the court came over, and they're all sitting around, and they're having coffee and cookies, and they're talking about what happened. And I just remember feeling out of place. I remember like not being able to relate to them, and so I just went outside to just sit down. Just in Elmira, they would always close the yard when it was dark, and I wanted to be able to just sit outside and stay outside. So I did that. So that was that, and taking a bath for the first time in 16 years was kind of like the highlights. I mean, I'd like to say we had a raucous party that lasted to the crack of dawn, but in reality, I had lost track with everybody. But in terms of the overall, I mean, the world was much different when I was released than when it was before I originally was incarcerated. I mean, cell phones, GPS, internet, these different methods of banking that didn't exist. Culture was different. Neighborhoods, houses, buildings, other structures were changed. There were just enough of them left to be familiar, but then quite a lot changed. So it felt like I was.
What year was it?
The year was 2006, and I had gotten convicted and therefore incarcerated.
I'm pretty sure the iPhone 1 came out that year, which is crazy.
Yeah, well, I remember
from 89 to the iPhone 1. That is a long time.
Right. Well, I remember I was at this luncheon, and my lawyer came up to me and said to me, well, this reporter who hadn't been able to come wants to speak to you. He's doing a story. Can you speak to him on the cell phone? So he hands me his phone. And I said, yeah, I'll speak to him. He hands me the phone. And I say to him, well, where are the holes at in the phone? Where am I supposed to speak at? So all right, so those things, the culture, and then the culture, and then neighborhood. So it felt like I was a parallel world. Definitely the social stigma, for sure. Very few people question my innocence because the actual perpetrator had been arrested and convicted, and even there was a report that 4 experts commissioned by the district attorney studied my case and issued the report breaking down at all the different junctures where the system broke down. So from all that, few people questioned my innocence, but it was more on the stigmatic level. Well, you were imprisoned for 16 years, yes, but wrongfully, yes, but you were there for 16 years. So how much of that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? So that's definitely an obstacle. I went to see mental health professionals. I used to go like 4 times a week for like 6 years. It's common for people to have post-traumatic stress disorder related symptoms, panic attacks, anxiety, feeling of processing things at a slower speed, feeling of having been frozen in time. Like I was released when I was 32, but I felt like I was 17 because that was the year I was when I was last free.
Right.
So dealing with, there was a psychological aspect of that. Then also I was released with nothing. I did eventually get compensated, but that took 5 years. But they just released me with nothing, and so, I struggled financially. I was always passed over for gainful employment. I did catch on as a weekly columnist for the Westchester Guardian, but they only wanted 1 article a week, and I was making money doing speaking engagements. But that also is not a consistent process. You only get paid when you get booked. So my point is that I had very few opportunities to have income coming in.
So trying to get jobs and stuff, like
trying to get jobs.
This was all on your background, like it was.
So it was all on my. So it was on my background in the sense that, well, it was not. So I didn't have a rap sheet anymore. So it's a remove from my rap sheet. But if people Google it, it's still on my background. And like, right. I didn't hide it either. It was still the stigma, yes. And then also it seemed like all the would-be employers, they wanted somebody who could hit the ground running, rather than being patient and doing some on-the-job training. So that was another aspect. And then also I had to catch up with the technology. And that was another factor. So it was difficult to have income, and I did bounce around from place to place. I didn't have stability of housing, and at one point I was just a couple of weeks away from being in a homeless shelter. But then Mercy College, they had agreed to give me a scholarship, so it had made it into one of the articles from the Journal News, a human interest item that I had gotten the GED and the associate's degree, and I was a year away from the bachelor's at the time that funding was cut for college education for prisoners. So So the dean, there was a dean, Dean Elkin from Mercy College, and she lined up a scholarship for me, and so they allowed me to finish the degree. And when I was a couple of weeks, when I lost the temporary housing, and I was a couple of weeks away from the homeless shelter, they allowed me to live. They agreed to allow me to live on campus. So that's how I avoided the homeless shelter, and they gave me the meal plan as well. So yeah, so that was all. Those were all very difficult times. It was very lonely, very, very lonely as well. You know, again, it was very awkward when I would meet up with my extended family because they had never come to see me, or come to see me very sporadically. So it was hard to it was hard to relate to them also. And all of my friends from the neighborhood had all long since, moved away. So I lost track from them.
Now, 16 years for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They had to pay you, right?
Yes.
How did that process work? And does that happen with everyone who gets wrongfully convicted?
It does not. There's some states that do not have compensation. So
and it's a weird thing too, because what is enough money for throwing away 16 years of your life and spending it that way? Like, if you were, before this happened, and they said, hey, you want to get paid X amount of dollars to do 16 years in prison, would this be enough to do 16 years?
Absolutely not.
The answer would be absolutely not.
Right, exactly. It would be no.
Or if you were to ask that prosecutor the same question, or that judge, how much money would it take for you to do 16 years in prison? I guarantee you it would be way more than anyone gets paid.
Right, exactly. Yeah, sure. I dare say that very few, if any, people would accept any amount of money.
Right.
I mean, I don't even think someone would accept $1 billion to do 16 years.
Right. What's money?
Right, Yeah, exactly. And it's just to concretize a little bit more. I miss, I didn't graduate high school. I didn't go to prom. Births, deaths, weddings, rites of passage. All of those things were part of the loss that I experienced. So not everybody gets compensated. So there's 12 states right now that do not get compensation.
Which states?
So one of them is Pennsylvania. So there's a coalition group called It Could Happen to You, which I'm a part of. I have a nonprofit organization, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. So after 5 years of this difficulty, I eventually got compensated. In terms of what the process was, I interviewed a few different lawyers, and I ultimately settled on one law firm. They took the case on contingency, meaning they didn't get paid unless I get paid. So they filed lawsuit in state court, and they also filed one in federal court. After 5 years, the state settled with me, and then 3 of the defendants settled with me in a federal court. And then I went to trial against the polygraphists, and I won there also. So in 5 years, I got some compensation. Now, while all that difficulty time period was happening, I was also an individual advocate. So I was writing, I was speaking, I was regularly meeting with elected officials, and I was trading privacy for awareness, so doing media interviews. So I did that for about 5 years, and I wanted to be involved in freeing people, but I was only able to do that nibbling on the edges. So there were some cases where people were fighting wrongful conviction cases, and I wrote about it in the newspaper where I was a columnist at. Or sometimes the lawyers would say, "Look, will you come to court so the judges can see you for whatever visual effect that'll have? Maybe if they see you're there supporting my client, they'll pay just a little bit more attention to this one. They'll pay, instead of the normal rubber stamp denying." So I would do that, and I would, similar to that, I would let them put my name in a press release to get more media attention than would otherwise be the case. And sometimes I would help pack the court, encourage other people to show up, just so the judge would see, hey, people are watching this one. It's a little bit harder to sweep it under the rug. But all that stuff is kind of like nibbling on the edges. So when I was compensated, I wanted to go to the next level, and so I took some of the money.
How hard? How long did the fight take? Was it actually? Did you have to fight for it?
Yeah, I had to fight for it. Sure, it took 5 years before I got anything. Yes, I had to.
And who were you going against? Who?
Yes. All right. So in the compensation case in the state, that was going against the Attorney General represents the state in that.
Okay.
And in the federal lawsuit, here's what I was going against. It was City of Peekskill, because it was their police officers who helped coerce a confession out of me and didn't document the witness interviews. And then it was also Westchester County, because it was their medical examiner who did the fraud. It was Westchester County Legal Aid for deficient representation. And then it was also Putnam County because it was their polygraphist. So I settled with the three of them. And in the federal lawsuit, I considered the polygraphist, Daniel Stevens, to be one of the worst of the lot, because until he stepped in, the Peekskill police were not able to coerce a confession out of me. And if they never did, then the fraud by the medical examiner wouldn't have happened, the prosecutorial misconduct wouldn't have happened, and I would have never then been a file on the public defender's caseload for him to. So I consider him to be the worst of the lot. So I went to trial against him. And I won. So that took an additional 3 years. So all told,
against him as an individual.
Well,
was
no,
he actually was he present, or was it?
No, he was present. No, he was present. So I sued him as well as the individual cops, all the people as an individual, but also the municipalities that they worked for. Yeah, exactly. So, and at the end of the day, that's only really style points.
Did these guys?
You can keep this up just for so long
right.
that you're suing them individually. In reality, at the end, when I went to it was time for the jury to deliberate. You have to drop them individually and just keep going against the municipality, because the danger is that if the jury holds them responsible individually, but not the municipality that they're working for, they're not. They don't have money. They don't have money.
Right.
Okay. So I did win a jury verdict against him. So I took $1.5 million from that, and I started Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which had the mission of freeing. I wanted to continue the education and policy work, but I wanted to be able to try to free people. I want to stop nibbling on the edges. Let's just do this directly. So, I had in-house attorney, investigator, paralegal.
You only got $1.5 million?
No. I said I committed $1.5 million. I didn't get $1 million. I got a lot more than that.
How much did you get?
Yeah.
Total.
I'll explain. So it was paid.
I know you have to pay lawyers.
Yes. Okay. So between the state and the federal, there was about $24 million paid.
Total.
Okay, total.
Obviously,
right.
when it all shakes out, it's going to be less.
It's going to be less. So in reality, as a plaintiff, you keep 55 to 60%, because the lawyers get a third. You have to pay the expenses and everything. Right. So so from that money, I took $1.5 million from that to start the organization.
Okay, got you. Okay.
Because this is a way of reaching back to get free people similar.
Jesus Christ, man, it's crazy to think that. I mean, you have to look at it both ways. It's unfortunate you had to go through everything that you did, and it's a nightmare what you had to go through at such a young age. But the fact that even though that wasn't nearly enough, you should have got 1,000 times more than that. It's something, and it gave you kind of like a springboard to get into where you're at now.
100%. Yes. Yeah. It really did. While I was doing that advocacy work, I told you I got the scholarship, and I got the bachelor's, and then I got the master's degree from John Jay College. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction cause and reform. Started the foundation, and in total, we've gotten 11 people home that were wrongfully imprisoned. Helped pass 3 laws aimed at preventing wrongful conviction. I'm an advisory board member of the coalition group It Could Happen to You, and we passed another 6 laws, 5 of them in New York. We passed one in Pennsylvania, so we're doing work now in New York, PA, California. I'd like to get into that for a second in a minute. But at some point, I became not satisfied with sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table. I wanted to be able to represent some of the clients, make some of the arguments, and hence going to law school. And as we sit here, I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for the last couple of years.
Wow. What happened to the medical examiner? What happened to the prosecutor? What happened to the guy who did the polygraph? Are those guys in jail?
No, they're not in jail. They were never arrested. There was never any real consequences for them. The most that could be said would be, when I brought the lawsuit, the medical examiner suddenly retired, and 2 weeks before I emerged, the prosecutor suddenly retired, and ironically, of all places, he then moved to Florida. Just to get away from the media storm of it. But nobody was ever arrested. Nobody was ever held accountable civilly. And even though I brought the lawsuit and everything, the municipalities that they worked for is what paid. They never paid anything. They never got in trouble in any sense of anything. And that is something that That is something that definitely bothers me some, even to this day.
In other words, they cut a check and nothing really changed. The system didn't change.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Speaking of systems changing, would like to discuss a little bit about what I'm up to now, and including the policy work.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'd mentioned I'm an attorney, so the foundation as a whole, we have 17 cases going. I'm involved in like 5 or 6 of them as co-counsel. We're pursuing policy changes. So here's what we have going on in New York. So when the law changed in 2017, it resulted in my colleagues and myself, pushing the legislature to mandate videotaping of interrogations. When the law came out, it came out watered down, and so they made exceptions for sex offenses, drug cases, and murder cases. And that really makes no sense, because those are the cases where we need it the most. That's
right.
What happened to me. So right now, the foundation, we do our policy work through the coalition group. It could happen to you. And the policy work that we're doing now, we're trying to get rid of those exceptions. So that's one initiative in New York. Another thing in New York is there's what's called the Youth Interrogation Act. And so that's a bill that says that it recognizes that people who are 16 and 17 years old, like I was, we don't understand our rights. So an attorney would have to explain our rights to us prior to being able to waive the rights and speak to the police. So there's that. And then there's a police deception bill, which would prohibit the police from using deception in the course of interrogations, recognizing that deception is inherently coercive. So those are 3 things in New York. Another one is called the Challenging Wrongful Convictions Act. So in a nutshell, the reason I had to write letters for 4 years is because you don't have a right to an attorney in a post-conviction proceeding. So the Challenging Wrongful Convictions Act would give people an attorney to do the investigation and file the motion, and it would also recognize that sometimes innocent people plead guilty. It's been estimated that 10% of people who are arrested plead guilty. So the way that it is now, so I have a client now, Omar Clark, and Omar was wrongfully convicted of an attempted rape in Erie County, New York. We're litigating the case now. So he was incarcerated, pre-trial detention, pending his trial, and for between 6 to 8 months. And he kept telling his attorney what witness to speak to, protesting his innocence. The attorney never spoke to the witness, never did any other investigation, and kept telling Omar, "You're going to be found guilty of a rape. You're going to get 25 years. So why don't you just take the 7-year offer?" And on the eve of trial, he was scared and had no confidence in his attorney, and he pled guilty. Subsequent to that, has a new attorney that's representing him, and then I entered the case as co-counsel. And so a ton of new evidence has come up towards his innocence. We're not allowed to argue in court that he's innocent. We have to argue because he pled guilty.
Right.
We have to argue that he had ineffective assistance of counsel, inadequate investigation. Here's what would have become up otherwise, and that's crazy. I have to jump through those hoops. So the Challenging Wrongful Convictions Act would allow people to make an actual innocence claim, a newly discovered evidence claim, even if you've pled guilty.
Why is the system set up to where so many people, I think it's like high 90% of people, take pleas and don't actually fight their case in situations like this? Like, that is the system. That's the way it works. Why is it like that? Is it because of lack of
I think it's
resources?
Yes, I think it's lack of resources. And many people even estimate it higher, 95, 97, maybe 98. I've seen these different percentages. I think it is lack of resources. I mean, literally, if everybody would insist on, exercising their right to a trial, the whole system would grind to a halt. So it's just
it costs too much money, right?
It would be, well, I don't know that it would cost too much money. I think that it's more money than what society is willing to pay. But the other thing, though, I want to mention, though, one of the reasons why the average length of wrongful incarceration, at least in the DNA case, is 14 years, is because there's a couple of tensions in the system. So one of them is finality of conviction versus accuracy, meaning the competing ideas that, look, you had your day in court, you lost, How long are we going to keep going through this? So in a way, having a finality, we can't keep going through this all the time. So in a way, finality makes sense in a way. But what good is a final conclusion if that conclusion is not accurate? So I think whenever there's an objective reason to revisit something, it should be. But then another thing is what I'll call proceduralism versus substantive justice. So why should it have mattered if my petition arrived 4 days late? Shouldn't it have been, well, am I innocent? Am I guilty? Are my legal arguments correct or are they not? Rather than the court deciding my case that 4 days, me being late 4 days, a lateness caused by the court clerk was the key thing. So I feel like a lot of judges are not willing to overturn convictions. They're thinking about, well, we're undoing all the time and money that went into something in the first place. So sadly, a lot of times, whether or not a case can receive justice or not is not whether the defendant has the facts or law on their side. It's instead whether something's going to be rubber stamp denied or not. So those issues in New York that I mentioned, a couple of parole issues. So what's called fair and timely parole. So when I went to the parole board, they were in the habit, they denied me because I maintained my innocence, and also, they rubber stamp denied because I was charged with a violent crime. There's a lot of people are just denied no matter what type of rehabilitation they can show. They're denied anyway just by nature of the crime. But that's really counterproductive because, first of all, the nature of the crime is something that could never change. That was known before the first day in prison was solved. And that's almost a complete abandonment of any idea of a belief in rehabilitation. So fair and timely parole would mean that the parole board would have to cite an additional factor in denying parole beyond that, not based solely on that, as what happened to me. Companion bill called elder parole. So, according to the Department of Corrections, when you're 55 years old, you're considered to be elderly just because of the impact of being in prison has on the body. So if anyone who is 55 and has served 15 years minimum would be guaranteed a parole board appearance, not a release, but an appearance, just to be considered whether you could demonstrate rehabilitation or not. So those are the things I'm working on in New York. We did pass the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct. So the first in the country, independent commission designed to investigate and review allegations of prosecutor misconduct, recognizing that that's a cause of wrongful conviction that runs through many of the cases, and that the prosecutors have almost no oversight. So we passed that. I'm trying to get the legislature now to pick the people that are going to serve on their commission. So we got the governor to put $1.75 million in the state budget for the commission, and we passed it. But we need the commissions to be named so it can start doing its work. That's in New York. In Pennsylvania is one of the 12 states, along with New Mexico being another one, that does not, they don't compensate people there. So the coalition group could happen to you. We have our Pennsylvania chapter. So I'm active in our Pennsylvania, New York, and California chapter. So we're working on in PA as we're building support for exoneratory compensation. And when we pass that, the next thing is we'll try to export that oversight of the prosecutors to Pennsylvania. In California, we're working on trying to get that oversight for the prosecutors. So that's what's going on the policy front. And we talked about changes, and in this next year alone, we could possibly free between 2 to 11 people in terms of the 17 cases that are active. But the challenge now, I would say my biggest challenge in running the nonprofit organization, is my network of people is that have giving capacity is limited because I was in prison for the last 16 years as opposed to making it in business over 10, 15, 20 years.
How long have you been out now?
I've been out for 16 years
16
now.
years.
Yeah, so we finally reached the equilibrium point. But my point is I found it hard to raise money, and so we're at our saturation point right now. I mean, we might have 17 cases that we're working on, but there's another 7 cases that are approved but waiting. And it's just like we would like to be able to do policy work, do something on the federal level, and enter a few other states where advocates are waiting for us to come in the field, such as like Florida. I know a bunch of people here. There's actually a Florida Southern chapter. There's a Florida Southern College chapter of the Deskovic Foundation here in Florida. But they're gathering documents, and
there's a guy who just got exonerated down here in Tampa, I think.
Yeah. Is that you talking about cl- Clemente Aguirre? You talking about or?
No.
There was another person that just in Tampa got exonerated. Yeah, but there's definitely people who've been exonerated here in Florida. In Florida, by the way, since we're talking about Florida, I mean, terrible provision down here when it comes to compensation. So Florida has what's referred to as the clean hands provision. And what that means is that anyone who's been exonerated, if they have been convicted of a crime prior to their wrongful conviction, or if they get in trouble afterwards, they would not be eligible for compensation.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. So that's a, yeah, so I mean, a
That
lot of people.
seems so stupid.
It is. That's something that
I
definitely
mean, great
needs
for
to be
protecting the
changed.
state, but
Right, but yeah, but the state really should be compensating people who've been
right.
wrongfully imprisoned. I mean, I look at my life before the 5 years of hell of my first 5 years of freedom compared to my life afterwards, like night and day. And so the idea that people who've been wrongfully imprisoned aren't compensated, it just seems so unjust. It just seems so unfair to me. I mean, any other unrelated conduct is irrelevant. Is yeah. So
I know Stark.
but
There's a prison called Stark, a couple hours north of here, which is there's a death row there, and I know there's a number of people each year that get exonerated that are on death row.
right, I met somebody in New York, Clemente Aguirre, a Floridian resident who did spend time on death row here in Florida before he was exonerated. Robert Dubois did like 35 years.
Robert Dubois.
Yeah,
Dubois.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
the guy who I was thinking.
Yeah, I
of.
think he did like 35 years, but he hasn't been compensated because there's a prior conviction before that. That he had before that. So I mean, these are real people, and yeah, the death penalty obviously risks the execution of innocent people. And then keep in mind that most people who most of us, we get wrongfully convicted in the first place because we can't afford a good attorney and experts in investigation. So now all those factors are at work in a death penalty case, except that there's a clock. There's a clock involved now because when your appeals are over and you're not in court anymore, the state goes ahead and carries out the execution. I remember reading in the New York Times that there was an estimation that maybe like 4 or 5% of the people on death row nationally were innocent. And
Yeah.
that's what if I have to ask you, what if there was a 4% crash rate of airplanes?
Right.
Do you think we'd keep flying them up there
Right.
and just taking the chance? I mean, I think we'd ground the damn thing, figure out what's causing it, make all necessary changes, and then cautiously, so applying that same lens and line of reasoning, when it comes to the death penalty, when it comes to wrongful convictions in general, it bothers me to no end that the causes of wrongful conviction are known: prosecutorial misconduct. Misidentifications cause wrongful convictions, 75% of the cases. Lying informants, 15%. Bad lawyering. It's not unusual for one public defender to represent 100 people at the same time.
Right.
The uneven financial playing field in terms of the budget between the public defender and the district attorney's office. So having an even playing field, so experts and investigators and manpower, equal pay for both sides, so the best talent doesn't go to one side or into private practice. We think about that and junk science and forensic fraud, which that was and the false confessions. I mean, some of these things, the bad lawyering, false confession, forensic fraud, all happened in my case. So my point in saying all of this is that the causes of wrongful conviction are known, but we don't see all the states and the federal government enact legislative reforms to address all of these concerns. Like having the prosecutorial commission is known, having better identification procedures. Those are already identified by social scientists, backed up by data. We know that in terms of false confessions, videotaping interrogations from beginning to end, camera focusing on both people, not having the deception, having rights explained to youth. We know what will false confession expert testimony. We know what changes the changes that we need to address these deficiencies are known, but these are not enacted and codified into law. And so now, today, right now, here today, we're lulled into a false sense of security. We're so advanced technology, right? And we have DNA testing. This could never happen now, right? Well, yeah, it can. Mm-hmm. DNA is only around in 5 to 12% of all serious felony cases. So most cases cannot be resolved through DNA. Not 88% of them in the best case scenario. So all those deficiencies that have led to wrongful convictions in the past are still out there. Those deficiencies still exist now as a whole. So this could happen now as just like it did before. That's why I think, getting funding for organizations that are doing this work and trying to expand the donor base. We need more people to step forward, and this needs to be, this is a really big problem. Wrongful convictions is a really big problem, but I don't feel it gets, I don't feel like it gets enough attention from the, as far as the private sphere and, people putting a ton of money into justice reform. I feel like mass incarceration is kind of stealing a lot of the oxygen out of the room, and funders need to think about organizations doing wrongful conviction and work. And we need to think also, if politicians of both political parties, they raise tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in what they refer to as small dollar donors, but why isn't that done for organizations freeing people, doing policy work? Why isn't the government? Why isn't this a huge priority for the government? Let's make the justice system more accurate. Per the National Registry of Exoneration, there's more than 3,100 exonerations from 1989 forward have happened across the country. And think about, we don't know how many people are wrongfully in prison. We can only count the exonerations, because if we could count the people who are not exonerated but wrongfully convicted, then we could get to them, we could help them, we could release them.
Right.
So I kind of believe it's kind of like an iceberg thing, where the part that you see above the surface is, is a fraction of the bigger whole. There's different estimates. 5%, 2.5%, 1%, 0.5%. I think that all those estimations are lower. I now, at this point now, there's been, I want to say about 21 people that I did time with that were exonerated either before me or after me. That's in 16 years. So I think, and again, you can't count it, I think the percentage is between 15 to 20%. The anecdotal data seems to be
15 to 20%
of the inmate population are innocent. That would be my estimation.
Right. Okay.
Look, the anecdotal data seems to be flowing my way. It seems like every week we're seeing one or two people that are exonerated. But when you think about all the wrongful conviction causes, when one bad actor is like in New York, we had there's this detective named Scarcella in Brooklyn, and at this point, it's between like 13 to 17 cases that he worked on, people have been exonerated from. Just using it as an example of how one bad actor can influence scores of cases. In Illinois, mass exoneration day, right? They had 18 people who were exonerated. The former detective Guevara and his crew, and one day 18 people exonerated that they worked on. Another day 15, and they're still doing it. Using that as examples, again, one person affecting many cases. When you look at jurisdictions where a different district attorney takes office and has a real conviction review unit where they're proactively looking for people who are innocent. In Dallas, Craig Watkins, more than 40 people were exonerated in 8 years through his unit. Ken Thompson, the DA in Brooklyn before he passed away, 23 people exonerated, 2.5 years. Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, more than 20 people exonerated. But most places don't have those units where they're real. But my point in all of this is, if all that stuff was done across the board, how many more people would we get that would be discovered to have been wrongfully convicted? So all that in support of my non-scientific statement, I think is 15 to 20%, anecdotally. But even if it is just 0.5%, when you think about was it 2.3, 2.4 million people enmeshed in the justice system one way or another. Any figure you want to put on that and divide, that's still quite a lot of people. That's still quite a lot of people, is what my point is.
Yeah. And then, you have general, I think, human nature of a lot of people too, like a lot of these prosecutors and a lot of these police that, they just want to climb the ladder in the bureaucracy, right? They just, like people like Robert Mueller, for example, that just want promotions. They want to move up to the next level, and they want to get as many convictions as possible, as fast as they possibly can, so they can make more money. I mean, greed is, big. Greed is a huge factor. And then, combined with the fact that there's it's this entire giant machine, of the prison system in the United States is just this big machine, and there's automatically going to be a huge bycatch. A lot of people are going to fall in between the cracks, a lot of innocent people, because, I don't know what the stats are, but I know we have more people incarcerated per capita than any place else on earth.
Right.
So unless, I feel like it's got to be more of like, you got to go back to the foundation of the system and how it's built to sort of fix this problem, because we're not trying to fix the problem. We're not trying to find a cure for it. We're not trying to find a cure to, eliminating crime or murders or the drug problem. It's become an industry that makes money, and the people that are involved get corrupted one way or another. And it's, money's involved and careers are involved. And I think that sort of casts a large shadow over everything else. And then, also a lot of these people that are getting convicted are, they're not celebrities. They're people that nobody knows. So that's why nobody gives a shit.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that too. And a lot of the people that are arrested, I mean, these are people typically on the bottom rung of socioeconomic status wise, and not having very many resources as well. So the people most vulnerable to that, least able to defend. How many people putting the guilt or innocence aside for a minute, but just how many people have the resources of an O.J. Simpson, for example, to have that type of legal team and experts and investigators and everything else? If people had an O.J. type defense, I mean, how many, with that much resources, how many people, as opposed to, somebody that's just working with a public defender that, you're very rarely meeting with you, not a lot of time spent on the case, not vigorously defending cases. That's another big problem I have, with a death row, a death penalty. I don't think we're ever going to see anybody rich. You think we're ever going to see anybody rich on death row?
No, absolutely not.
Right. So just to bring
yeah,
that up.
It's unfortunate. It's part of the whole quote unquote prison industrial complex that it's part of a bigger thing that it's impossible to get the reins around.
Sure. One of the questions that I'm asked by a lot is people ask me, are you angry? I get that question semi-frequently, and my answer is this: I'm not angry. I want to enjoy my life as much as I can, and I don't think I can do that while being angry or bitter at the same time. I feel like I've lost so much already as is. Why would I want to, in effect, give over the rest of my life? And if I was to be angry or bitter, it's not like I would be negatively impacting any of the people involved in what happened. I would really be the only loser in that scenario. I do make sense of everything that happened to me in a kaleidoscopic manner. Like I do, I found my purpose in the world, which is to fight wrongful conviction, free people in the same position I was in, prevent what happened to me from other people hence the policy work, and secondarily, some of the other humane things that I witnessed while I was subjected to, and that I was witnessed while I was in prison. Things like, the verbal abuse from the guards to the prisoner and prisoner violence. The people, so many people over sentenced. The terrible medical care in prison, the way the food is, lack of college education for prisoners, vocational trades being obsolete, compassionate release, where if someone's been determined to be terminally ill, that they could be released so that they could die with a little bit of dignity with their family in a normal environment. And what I saw while I was in prison, I mean, often by the time the bureaucracy made a decision and they were released, they died like 1 or 2 days later. And sometimes the decision came down after somebody had already passed away. So all of those, the indifference. I mean, I firmly believe that any rehabilitation that happens in prison is despite the system. It's overcoming the system rather than because of it. And I think that's backwards. And I've mentioned all of that to say, hence my secondary interest in general justice reform. I think that prisons should be humane. No one is saying, I'm not saying anyway, that people who are guilty shouldn't be sent to prison, that they shouldn't be punished. I think the sentence should fit the crime. And the punishment is supposed to be the loss of your freedom. It's not supposed to be that you're going to be mistreated and treated like an animal or worse while there. So hence wanting to fight for the secondary justice reform issues. And so I look at everything like that, and the vehicle that allows me to not be angry is I do this work and I take that energy that I feel and I channel it into the advocacy work, and I have some inner peace that way. And I can.
Yeah. Why dwell on the past? Why dwell on the negative? The more you think about that stuff, the more you torture yourself and you punish yourself even more.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
The only one that suffers is you.
That's right.
If that's the mindset that you have.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. It is. It is for sure.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for doing this, man.
Sure. A couple of quick things. If the audience has enjoyed the interview, and they would like to hear a little bit more about me, there is a documentary short available on Amazon Prime called Conviction. It was produced by Gio Wirtz, so that's available on Amazon Prime. It's I've gotten into like more than 20 film festivals. It's won a number of awards. So if people want to see more about that, more about me, they can certainly check that out. I'd like to give a brief shout out to Restorative Justice International. I sit on their Global Advisory Council. I advise them on wrongful conviction issues. So as an organization, when issues come up policy-wise in the legislature, they think about like what position they're going to take. And so my role in that is I lay out an issue. I try to keep my opinion out of it so they can understand the issue. And then I give them what my opinion is also, and then they decide as a whole what position as an organization they're going to take. And they often interview candidates running on a justice reform plank. So I do enjoy working with them. I want to conclude by saying that I think that the wind is at our back. I feel like there's so much work left to be done, so many laws to be changed, so many people to be freed, and yet we have the momentum. It's kind of like an exciting time in history right now in terms of, these issues, because it does seem like every year more organizations pop up that are doing innocence work. There's more individual attorneys getting involved in this. So I want to encourage listeners, if you are an attorney, think about doing at least one pro bono wrongful conviction case. So there is that, the documentaries and docuseries and podcasts and blog talk radio and written blogs. So many different
people are
ways.
fascinated by the subject, man.
They are, and I just want to encourage people to keep thinking and getting involved. Into that. So many different careers. I mean, even within a nonprofit setting, whether it's grant writing, public relations, social media, websites, fundraising, on the reintegrative side, social work, psychologists, lots of ways to get involved is my point, beyond just being an investigator or being an attorney. And look, the fight against wrongful conviction is about justice and accuracy. It's not against the cops or the prosecutors. Definitely against them when they're rogue, when they break laws, when they run over constitutional rights, state rights, unethical things. Yeah, against all of them. Okay? No, it's not a few bad apples, though you'd like us to think that. It's far more than that. Nonetheless, it's not everybody in all those positions. So people in those professions, when they do their job in an ethical, legal manner, I have no issues with them. So I do want to mention. I do want to mention that, and I'd like to put my website
Yeah.
out if I
Yep.
could do that. www.deskovic.org, DESKOVIC. You can follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Foundation has a Patreon page as well if you'd like to get involved. Lots of people out there still to free, and I hope some people have listened to me and today and feel inspired. Reach out. You can email me through the website, but definitely we need to get more resources in so that we can work on still more cases and try to bring policy changes. Because I really, at the end of the day, I see wrongful conviction as it's not a New York problem. It's not an American problem. I mean, it is, but larger than that, this is really a worldwide problem. I mean, if we have this many deficiencies in the U.S., where we're advanced technologically, especially as considered versus a third world country. I mean, what's going on in those countries where their system, we got this many problem here, what's going on over there where they're not as advanced? So I really see wrongful conviction as a worldwide issue, and my wild dream would be that one day we would have not only a chapter of the foundation in each state, but ultimately in each country. So.
Well, it's a wonderful thing what you're doing, man, and I appreciate you for doing everything in your capacity to get the word out and sharing your story with us today.
All right, well, thank you so much for having me, sharing the platform, and by all means, send me the link when this comes out, each of them, and I'll definitely do my part to promote this on social media. So wonderful platform, and thanks so much for reaching out as well. So we got the Mutual Admiration Society going on.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank
Goodbye,
you.
world.